Hello, and today we want to talk here about ways to play Sicilian defense for white. So what we want to do, we want to turn positional players that play white side of Sicilian into bloodthirsty killers. So remember, when you play Sicilian defense, you cannot play it passively, because this opening must be played. You must have very active plan, otherwise, as a rule, you're going to get worse game. So let's look at some games played by the strong grandmasters against various variations of Sicilian defense. First game we're going to look at was played by Bulgarian GM Topolov, one of the top players in the world today. E4, C5, Knight F3, E6, D4, C takes D, Knight takes D4, A6, Bishop D3, and G6. Now normally it's not recommended to play E6 and G6 in the same game, especially in Sicilian, because in those cases D6 square of blacks becomes very vulnerable. But not in this position, not in this move order, because D file is congested by white pieces, and white does not have immediate plan to occupy D6 square. After G6, white played C4, and Bishop G7, Bishop E3, Knight C6, Knight takes C6. This is all theory. B takes C, and C5. Now this is very interesting move. What is the idea of move C5? This turns game into very, very sharp position. So white is giving up the B2 pawn to play Knight D2, and later Knight C4 and Knight D6, having dark square weaknesses occupied. So after C5, that was played Bishop takes B2, and now Knight D2. In this position, I don't think black should have played Bishop takes A1, what they did. I think black should have tried just to retreat somehow and try to suffer. They would have been suffered anyway because of D6 square. But giving up dark square bishop makes their game practically lost. And after queen takes A1, I find this position very bad for black. Black played F6. Of course, not queen F6 because of the bishop D4, and rook on H8 is lost. So black played F6, and white played Knight C4. Now let's talk about this position. Black has a rook and a pawn for a bishop. But knight is going to be on D6, next move. Plus, black's light square bishop looks like a tall pawn. And knight cannot move yet because of F6 weakness. And black cannot castle. It looks very, very bad. Probably because it is very bad. So knight C4. And here black played A5, trying to bring C8 bishop into the game by playing bishop A6. Knight D6 check, king F8, and before white launches decisive attack on black's king position, they have to castle. So we castled here. and bishop a6. This is some achievement for black. At least they exchanged one dead piece, c8 bishop, so white played bishop takes a6, rook takes a6, and now f4 for white. This looks really bad. Now black has problems. White does not have immediate threat, but black has problems of making move. Almost anything you play creates more weaknesses. Black played h5, trying to bring maybe rook into the game. Rook h7 and rook e7. And after h5, white played rook f3. Now white wants to go rook g3. So h4 stopping rook g3. Now white goes rook h3. What white wants, since black cannot really do anything, white's plan is quite slow but very deadly. Bishop f2 and bishop takes h4. After a4, bishop f2, and now black played rook a8. Bishop takes h4. You see that black plays just back and forth. They played last 4 moves with the rook pawns and then with the rook backwards, rook a8. So black has absolutely no plan, no idea, no game, no hope. King g7, f5. This is a kind of beginning of the end. Now if black goes g5, white can simply take on g5 because of the pin on a large diagonal, a1, h8, on a long diagonal. f5, queen a5. Now black is trying to show some activity to penetrate with the queen, but it's too late now. And so white plays queen c1, rook b8, and now bishop to e1. You see the queen is hanging, so then after queen a6, rook g3, attacking g6 pawn. Game is practically over. So queen e2 was played, and now bishop d2. Knight to e7, h3. Rook b5. Black wants to find some relief after knight takes b5 and queen takes or pawn takes b5 to get rid of the strong knight on d6. But after rook b5, white played rook e3 first. Queen has to go to h5. And now when queen is out of the action on this side, on the queen side, knight takes b5, c takes b, and rook d3. Now we see that white is not attacking on the king side anymore, but black collapses in the center and on a queen side. G takes f, rook takes d7, queen to e8, and c6. We see how bishop can come to b4 or queen can come to the c5. King g6, bishop b4, white's piece is completely dominating the board. Knight c8, queen e3 with the idea of queen g3 check, mating attack, and somehow black found a couple of more moves to stay alive. And after queen g3 check, rook g5, queen c7, threatening rook g7 check, threatening rook d8, and after queen h8, rook d8, black resigned. Very well played game. It's interesting to notice that this kind of blockading position and positional sacrifices very frequently appear as ideas in various different openings. Very frequently in English opening, where white also sacrifices some material, in some cases exchange, and gets dark square, occupied dark squares. So, but in Sicilian, we just saw one, and this is actually common strategy for white to play on the dark squares. We can find it very frequently also in French defense, with early exchange of dark square bishops and white occupied dark squares. So this was one example. Now, a game we want to see next is a game played between Anand and Gelfand. It's in one of my most favorite variations of Sicilian defense. Is a Grand Prix. I made a lot of researches in there, and I was pleased to see this game played, but we're not going to really stop in the opening part in detail, so we're going to go through the opening real quickly. Knight c3, d6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop c4. It's interesting that bishop c4 is a very common move in this position, but what I like better is bishop b5 check, and after bishop d7, bishop c4. The question is why bishop on d7? Why we want to have bishop on d7? Because in some cases, when black plays knight c6 and then e6 and they try for d5, d5 is going to be very difficult to play with bishop on d7. So anyway, but let's look at what happened in the game. Anand played bishop c4, knight c6, d3, e6. White castled, and knight g to e7. And here, white played queen e1. Well, if we now put black bishop on d7 as an extra tempo for black, this is a lot better position for white than the other one. That's what I was advocating. That's why I was advocating bishop b5 check and then return. So after queen e1, black went h6, bishop b3, and a6. And now white went e5. This is very, very interesting move because allows d5 for black. Now, what would have happened on d5? I think this was the better move to play. That was not the move chosen by black. Black played knight f5. But let's look at d5 move. d5 is the move that kind of shuts off the bishop on b3 and gives black, I think, normal position. So then white maybe has to play knight e2, followed by c3 and bishop c2, which is double-edged position. I personally don't like black's approach when they played knight f5, king h1, and knight f to d4. Because now white gets the e4 square to knight e4, knight takes f3, rook takes f3, d takes e, f takes e, and knight takes e5. Okay, black won a pawn. Are they happy? I don't think they are, because, well, if we look at this position after rook f1, we see that c5 pawn is hanging. White is going to play bishop f4, queen g3, and you see every white piece is developed perfectly, and they have very good position here. So after rook f1, black played g5. Well, possibility was castling. But what happens after castle? I think this is very dangerous position for black, because after bishop takes h6, black plays bishop takes h6, and if white goes knight f6 check, and king, anywhere king moves, queen takes e5 next, and black's position is very suspicious. After bishop g7, yeah, it's not suspicious anymore. Now it's almost over. After rook f3, there are no suspicions about this position. So, which means that white couldn't castle in that position. If white cannot castle yet, so they played g5 to stop bishop takes h6, and after the castling. Now, after g5, queen g3, as planned, and still black cannot castle. If black castles here, well, they did castle actually. I don't think they could castle because the position becomes very dangerous, almost lost there. After they castle, bishop takes g5. When I said black couldn't castle there, that does not really mean that I have some other good move in mind for black. I don't have any move in mind, but because maybe there are no good moves. What white wants, maybe play bishop f4, attacking knight, because if pawn takes bishop, then queen takes g7. Becomes very bad for black. So in the position, after g5 and queen g3, black castled, and white played bishop takes g5. Now, and after bishop takes g5, it's already close, game close to the end. H takes g, and knight takes g5. Now every piece is attacking. You see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. Every piece is an attack. 2 pieces defending. This has to be decisive attack for white. Knight takes g5, knight g6. Rook a to e1. Every piece is ready. Queen e7. And now rook f5. Now why rook f5? First thing white will want to do is to stop black from any kind of pawn activities. And secondly, after rook f5, well, we see the idea in a couple of moves. Bishop f6, that's the black's move. Black has to find defense against threat of queen h3. That's another reason why rook f5. Protecting the knight on g5, because immediate queen h3 will be met by queen takes g5. So rook f5 kind of protecting the knight on g5. So after rook f5, black plays bishop f6, again stopping queen h3 because of bishop takes g5. Now white cannot go queen h3, but white plays knight takes e6. Now black made a terrible move, f takes e, and lost quickly. But here already very difficult to find any reasonable defense for white, for black. F takes e, and now rook takes e6. And here is the position. White's rook is hanging, plus black has extra 2 pieces, but there is no defense. King g7, they gave queen away, because it's easy to see what happens when bishop takes e6, and now queen takes g6, and you'll see that everything ends in a matter of 2 moves. Because on queen g7, bishop takes e6, king h8, rook h5, it's a checkmate position, and same thing happens on bishop g7, bishop takes e6 check, king h8, rook h5. So what happened in the game instead, after rook takes e6, black played king g7, and after rook takes e7 check, bishop takes e7, rook takes f8, bishop takes f8. You know, material is not that bad for black. They have 2 minor pieces and a rook for queen and 3 pawns, but those minor pieces are really minor now because they are all undeveloped. And after h4, white cannot keep position, black cannot keep position together. Black just resigned in this position because after king h7, h5, and if knight moves, you see the queen can, actually if knight moves to e7, then maybe simply bishop f7, building threats, or maybe even queen c7, totally paralyzing black's pieces. And if knight goes to e5, then all kinds of unpleasant things will happen after queen g8 check. Black is totally lost and they resign. So this showed one careless move that was played by black. They did not go d5. They supposed to go. The principal mistake was made by Gelfand, world-class player, that he plays Sicilian all his adult life. And he failed to recognize that he's supposed to close the center. He made principal mistake. He's supposed to play that position closed and not open. If he played d5, it would have been closed position with double-edged, but he opened position at the time, and in the area he was not really safe, and white's pieces became overwhelmingly active. So that was the principal mistake, and he paid for it. It's dangerous to do against some players of Anand's class. One game I wanted to show you, played by me when I was a little boy, like 30-year-old boy, very little. And I played game in the USSR Championship. E4, C5, also Sicilian, and very interesting game, because the reason why this is the only game of mine I want to discuss here, because this is very typical for the subject we want to discuss on this tape. It's very planned and dynamic play by white. d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, bishop e3, e5, knight b3, bishop e7, queen d2, bishop e6, f3. Actually, this game was played in 70s, and today this position, one of the main positions of Najdorf variation of Sicilian. At that time, it was like a weird way to play for white. f3, black castled, white castled, knight bd7, and g4. White goes and trying to develop attack on king side. Knight bd7, g4, b5, a3, Knight b6, trying to go knight c4, g5, and knight h5. Knight d5, bishop takes d5, ed, and rook c8. I don't think white has any serious advantage in this position, but white's plan, white was very consistent, playing on the king's side, and after bishop takes c5, rook c8, all of a sudden they played. Now it's very difficult to continue attack, because after we go h4, you cannot really continue moving h-pawn to open files on king's side. But what has happened here, the change that happened, that there is a c6 square available for white knight. So I played knight a5. I don't really get the c6 square, but I want to go knight c6, and then knight is going to be very strong, except black has knight takes d5, winning a pawn. But that was positional sacrifice. Queen takes d5, queen takes a5, and bishop d3. Now let's talk about this position. White has two very strong bishops and total control on the light squares. Knight on h5 is out of play, and black does not have any way to make progress on the queen side, because b4 is not possible, because queen is going to take on a5. So black has big problem making active moves. Bishop d3, g6, king b1, prophylactic move, queen c7, and bishop to e4. You see, the key piece in the game is bishop on e4. White has very strong, very powerful pieces. Rook b8, now preparing a5 and b4 to get some play on queen side for black. Queen b3 by white. Rook f2 c8, and I played bishop d5. Now this bishop is totally dominating on d5, bishop f8, and I went f4. Here, black played knight g7. Now why didn't black take the f4 pawn? If black plays ef, for example, then white will play rook f1. And you can see taking on e3 is deadly after rook takes f7. And white wins very quickly. But if black does not take the bishop on e3, then white will play bishop takes f4, and f-file is open, and every piece can attack black's king. If bishop will retreat and go to d4, you see the aim of the pieces is going to pay off. So the move that was chosen by black was knight g7, actually a very strong move, because white wants to put the knight on f5. Black wants to put the knight on f5. Here I played h4, and it's also a good move, because if knight moved away from h5, I want to play h4 and h5, opening the files. Everything is very logical and very consistent. Very strong move, h4. Knight f5 and rook h2, also a very good move. This is multi-purpose move. Idea of the rook h2 move, you will see that black is threatening knight takes e3, queen takes e3, and queen takes c2 check. So what is the idea of rook h2 move? First of all, rook h2 defends c2 pawn, and secondly, prepares in case after h5 to double rooks on h-file. So this is very useful move. It's one of those quiet moves during attack, once you're attacking your opponent's position, that are very, very useful and beneficial. Rook h2, bishop g7. Now h5 is planned, a5, h takes g, h takes g. Here black is also ready to start some attack. They want to go a4, b4, maybe open lines, files on queen side, and later maybe open the bishop also. So black's threats also cannot be undermined. Queen d3, b4. Now what is the idea of move queen d3? This is a very good move. Here's what black wants to do here. This is one of the tricks. You have to remember, when there is attack on both sides, you have to find fine line between attack and defense. We are attacking on this side and also have to try to make your opponent's attack not as strong, and also do some defending moves. Queen d3 is a great defending move because black wants to play a4 and after queen d3, b4. That guarantees them opening more files. Now, after white played queen d3, we see that on a4, I will go c3. And now it's very difficult to open any files for black. But if they go b4, that's what they did, then we go a4. So again, it's difficult to open any files. Rook e8, rook dh1, as we said, we doubled on h file, b3, and c takes b. Black is desperate for some counterplay. Rook b4, f takes e, rook takes e5. You see, black's pieces are very active. Active rook, active second rook, knight on f5 is not badly placed, queen on c7 and bishop on g7. But what white has is powerful bishop on d5 and h file. And king is not very safe for white. Rook takes e5, rook c1. Now black has to watch the back rank, because if black queen goes somewhere, allows rook c8 check, it may end very bad. So queen d8, and now bishop d2. Bishop d2 attacking black rook. Rook d4, queen a6. Now you see, if either one of these rooks takes this powerful bishop, then we have rook c8. So rook e8, black has to protect the back rank. Then bishop c6, attacking rook. Rook f8. Active pieces become very passive. Rook voluntarily went from e5 to f8. Bishop c3, attacking the rook. Queen takes g5. Since now if rook moves somewhere and black tries to keep the material, that may end up very badly, because bishop takes, well, actually rook h1 right away. Those are deadly threats. Also, white can play bishop takes a5. So what happened in this position is queen takes g5, and white played queen takes a5. There is no rush in taking this rook. Queen f4, rook c to h1. And now you see that moving this rook is absolutely out of question, because on rook d3 there is an x-ray defense of h8 square from c3, and this is checkmate. Next move, bishop takes h8, rook takes h8. So this is not an option. Black cannot move the rook. So they played knight g3, but now rook g1, knight e4, bishop takes d4, Queen takes h2. Game ended in a couple of moves. Queen d5. Now you can tell that even if white does not succeed in this attack, you see the a pawn by itself can win a game, because after white goes a5 and a6, it's going to be this pawn, a pawn is going to cost black whole rook. Queen d5, knight f2, attacking rook, rook c1, knight d3, bishop takes g7, white hits the knight on d3, queen d2, rook h1, king takes g7, and now forced to win, queen d4 check. Of course, king cannot move because rook h8 mate. And after f6, bishop e4 wins d3 knight and the game. That's how game won. It was just consistently was played by white. And what happened here? We sacrificed pawn for getting very active bishop and control of light squares, and we started building attack on the king side. And black had to find counterplay, and they had to open position real quick. And when position opened, two bishops that white had, they developed, white's pieces were more active, and two bishops that white had developed very, very powerful threats that ended in a forced win. So next game we want to look was actually very interesting game played between Shirov, was played by GM Shirov against Ljubojevic. Now this game, e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, cd, knight takes d4. This is also very active. You can see that every game we're going to look at, and if you take any game, find in any database that won by white, played with by good player, you see that every game that was played by white was played actively. You cannot find too many games where white was maneuvering passively without creating threats and they won normal game. Maybe they won by some kind of blunder or anything. But there are no this kind of games in a history where white was playing passively but won nicely. You can see that in other openings, in closed openings, but not in Sicilian. Knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, a6, bishop e2, knight f6. Knight f6 is not a normal move. The normal move is either d6 or queen c7 here, not knight f6. Now knight takes c6, bc, e5, knight d5, and knight e4. Now you see white wants to play c4 and knight d6. We have a hole on d6. Queen c7 and knight d6 check. Bishop has to take, obviously. Pawn takes. And queen b6. Well, taking on d6 is bad because after c4, black loses the knight on d5, since queen b4 check will be met by bishop d2. Well, obviously, taking on d6 is out of question, so queen b6 was played. And after queen b6, now white has to find ways of maintaining the initiative and actually developing the initiative, since pawn on d6 stops the black's development. c4, very strong move. Kicking knight to f6, and now castle. black has to find a way to activate the c8 bishop and get some kind of coordination. First, they have to castle, of course. White castle, black castles, and bishop e3. Attacking the queen. Black played queen takes b2. Now, what else can black do in this position? If they play c5, trying to play bishop b7, then rook b1 may be very strong with the idea of b4. Also, c5 pawn becomes extremely weak. So black played queen takes b2, and after bishop d4, played queen a3. Now bishop takes f6, g takes f. Okay, let's talk about this position. What do you think this position, what do you think white should do here? And how do we assess it? We can assess it only one way. It's totally busted for black. King is open. No piece is around black's king. No black piece can protect it. It's very difficult for white to transfer pieces on this side. Queen d4, queen g4, maybe rook b1, rook b3, rook g3. King cannot be safe where it is. Move was made queen d4, threatening queen g4 check. After queen d4, now black chose rook b8. Now, of course, white doesn't want to take on f6 because black is going to take on d6. And perpetual check white has, but that's not obviously what they want. And after rook b8, white played rook ac1. We already mentioned we want more pieces on king's side. Rook c3 and rook g3. Well planned. Rook ac1, e5, queen g4 check, king h8, and queen f5. This is very deadly. So the idea is queen takes f6. Taking on d6 is impossible because after bishop d3, it's just simply mate on h7. So only move black has is king g7. And now white cannot play rook c1 and c3, but they need this rook on a king's side. So rook c1 to d1. Now threatening rook d3 and g3. e4, black has to try to stop it somehow. Queen g4 check, king h8, and queen takes e4. Now sometimes I've seen games when one side resigns when there is no threat. The opponent is not threatening anything, but the whole position is so pitiful that you have no pieces to move and you have nothing to look forward to, and you rather end it quick. In this position, it's true. It's the same thing. There are so many threats, like queen e7, bishop d3, mating threat, rook d3 and rook h3, that there is no way black can defend themselves against the immediate threats. And if there was a way to defend against concrete mate, a concrete instant disaster, the position still will be lost. So what is there to play for? Well, in this case, simply bishop d3 cannot be met and black resign. But if you look at the position, it's hard to imagine that it was played by grandmaster with black. Black is totally lost and destroyed. That was instructive game. Now let's look at another game played by Shirov. This was played also very well on weak squares and unsafe king position. That was played in one of the sub-variations of Sveshnikov variation in Sicilian. Let's look. e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight db5, bishop b4. Well, actually, Sveshnikov variation is d6 move, but this bishop b4 variation was also very popular at the one point. So a3, bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, d5. This is also very well known in a theory. And the main move for white here is e takes d. However, lately they started playing bishop d3 more and more often. And after bishop d3, black played d4. Now, I don't think it's a good move, even though there were games played with this move, and black did okay in some cases. I think this is very anti-positional move. I think the best black has here to suffer in slightly worse position after d takes e, and I think it's a good way to draw for black. Knight takes e4. This is my personal opinion. Knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, d1, king takes, d1, and bishop d7, followed by f5. It's very difficult, very, very difficult to win this position for white. And that's why it was very surprising to me that Shiro went for this position, and he likes normally a lot more complicated and sharp positions. So what was played by black is d4, knight e2, e5, castle, castling, h3, rook e8, and knight g3, bishop e6, f4. Obviously, white must take on f4, because black must take on f4, otherwise white can even play f5 and bishop g5, and then it may become very dangerous. So e takes f, bishop takes f4, and knight to d7. Now, if we talk about this position, what does black want? If we let black make 3 moves in a row, now just to underline their strategical goals in this position will be f6, knight e5, and queen d7. Black has positional advantage. But in most of the tournaments, they don't allow you to make 3 moves in a row. So after knight d7, queen h5, that's a step 1 to stop this plan, like knight e5, queen h5, and there was absolutely awful move was made by Grishuk, who is very talented young grandmaster today, one of the top grandmasters also. g6 is the move that I did not understand when I was 7-year-old, and I still don't. And so is I asked some other GMs if they understand this move, and nobody said they do. And based on the outcome of the game and next few moves, even the author of this move didn't understand what he was doing. So g6 is terrible move. You see, black does not have a dark square bishop. White does. And when you play g6, when I see, if I did not know who was playing, and I saw move g6, I would want immediately to find out what his rating is. So g6 is terrible, terrible move. I'm not saying there is a very good move for black, but any move, like rook b8 would have been better. But here black creates some incredible holes on king's side. And game, I think, is almost over. Queen h6, queen f6, bishop g5, queen g7, and queen h4. You can tell this f6 square is, right, itching to put some piece there and to end the game. Knight c to e5, bishop h6, queen h8. You cannot call this position. That's what black was going for. Normally, when your plan is to put your queen on h8 behind king, then you have to reassess your qualifications or see the doctor. Queen h8, but at this point he had already no choice. Queen h8, knight f5, very simple, elementary shot that brings game to the end. Now white is threatening knight e7 check, and after rook takes just to win exchange. Or if black takes this knight on f5, then white can simply retake attacking bishop, and next move is queen g5 check. This is just too brutal to show more than once. Knight f5, bishop takes f5, ef, knight takes d3, cd, queen e5. Okay, queen is out. Dark squares remain weak. Queen e5, rook f4, knight c5, rook a to f1. You see every piece, 1, 2, 3, 4, everything against black's king. Bishop controls every dark square in the area, and after file opens, there is not going to be much hope for black. Rook af1, knight takes d3, f takes g, f takes g. Well, if knight takes f4, then black, I think, just loses a queen or more. G takes f, simply wins the game. King takes f7, rook takes f4, and if king goes back, there are ways, multiple ways, something like queen g3, for example, ends the game, and after king h8, rook f8, and mate in 2 moves, rook takes f8, queen takes e5, and next move is mate on g7. So there is no defense, of course, in this position, with knight on d3, rook on f4, f takes g. So after f takes g, black played f takes g. Now when you see all these pieces and you see the critical e7 square, you can tell there will be no defense. What is the way of finishing the game? So rook f7, knight c5. Now rook g7 check, king h8, and rook f7. Knight to e6. The threat is rook takes h7 check and rook g7 check. Knight to e6, and white simply plays rook takes g6 check. Threat is bishop g7. And all this for that equal material, but there's also threat of rook takes h7 check, king takes h7. Actually, it may not be, this particular one may not be threat, but there are several different ways to win the game. After rook takes g6, black played d3, rook g4, rook g8, and now rook takes h7, and black resigned after king takes h7, simply bishop g7 with a mate next move. Very well played Actually, it didn't have to be very well played by white. Okay played by white and terribly played by black. What did black do? Maybe black played only one bad move, g6, but that was so bad that was more than enough. So what conclusion we can make? So when you play with white and you play very actively, you have to learn, you have to know some tools which you use in attack. In this case, it was f4. In some cases, we saw in one of my games where we got a lot of light squares control, or kingside assault. There are several tools. Every game you see in, try to look at the games that played by white, by good players. And you see that every game has some handwriting of active play. And this active play will be like a window for you. There's ways to, once you'll see these games, a window for you to understand the initiative, the way you want to play Sicilian, and the way you master your positional pressure or attacking skills. Thank you very much.